When it comes to like trans stuff, when it comes to like our issues and so on, I feel like they're pretty straightforward. What do we have to deal with? We have to deal with the mismatch between our gender identity and our sex. We are being forced through puberty that doesn't align with our gender identity, and that causes distress, that causes depression. You isolate yourself, you've tried to find a way to cope, you go and have like a form of escapism and so on. Then if you're a trans person, literally every interaction, every social interaction that you have, no matter how small, it is going to be affected by the fact that you're trans. If you're a trans woman and you're not being treated like a cis woman, you will notice that. You will notice how even our quote-unquote allies are going to degender you, other you, when it comes to meeting strangers and essentially being forced to always out yourself. Because maybe you're just like in the middle of like transitioning, or you're before transitioning where you're still forced to hide behind this mask. Before I started transitioning, before I started going on HRT and so on and seeing like changes, I was scared to put on a skirt, because back then when I was like 16 and I put on a skirt or younger and I looked into the mirror and I just saw a boy wearing a skirt, and that broke me. I couldn't talk about this with anyone because I didn't have a supportive environment, because I didn't have the research, the resources to even learn that trans people existed. These are like the things that we have to deal with. If you're a trans person, you're also apparently forced to represent the entirety of the trans community, and people will pick out like some trans people who have done bad things or things that, you know, the media and so on portray as something bad. You know, when it comes to like me advocating for trans rights and talking about how supporting trans kids is important, that is being portrayed as something evil. And people will use me as an example of like one of the bad trans people and attack other trans people for just following me, or use that as a justification for why they are transphobic. That is just what we have to deal with. There aren't that many things that the trans community has to face that is going to like divert from this. A trans woman wants to be seen as a woman and be treated like a woman. Obviously, in this society where women are being seen as lesser, inferior, and so on, it would be very nice if trans women, cis women could be treated like human beings and not something inferior and lesser. But trans people just want to live their life as the gender as they are. And a lot of us need medical transition to get changes that resonate with our gender identity. So when they are like allies, you know, quote unquote allies, to say, oh, trans women, like, you don't need voice training, you don't actually need HRT, it's actually more powerful if you break gender stereotypes and you don't transition. And it's like, okay, I have dysphoria. When I pick up the phone and somebody calls me sir, when I go outside and somebody calls me sir, when they call me he, him all of the time, when I look into the mirror and I see a man, that is not progressive. That is torture. And I don't feel like I need to endure this just so cis people who fulfill gender stereotypes and gender expectations and so on can feel like we are abolishing the patriarchy or whatnot. And if we go on this journey, when we go and transition and so on, when we meet the expectations, then we are actually reinforcing the gender stereotypes, and we are making things worse for all of the cis people. That is what we have to deal with. This is how it's like being portrayed. When we talk about like women's rights and bodily autonomy and so on, when there are cis women who dismiss trans women and what we are fighting for, how, you know, the TERF rhetoric, the gender ideology and so on is pushed to the point where it's normalized language. When you see like a UK headline of feminist talks about men invading women's spaces, you know that they are not a real feminist. They are some ultra-conservative, misogynistic woman who has been brainwashed by the patriarchy to push the idea that trans women are evil, predatory men. And most of the time, they are not even talking about, like, you know, adults. They're talking about literal children. They talk about, like, 9-year-old, 10-year-old trans girls who just want to be in sports with other girls in school, so they have some form of normalcy, so they have some form of community, so they can keep going, and it makes it easier to live their life. Because hey, if a trans person gets seen and respected and treated as the gender that actually aligns with their gender identity, not with their phenotype that other people can observe and are going to like determine who they are, it is actually really helpful, and it helps your mental health. It makes them feel less depressed. It makes them feel less anxious. It makes them feel less suicidal. And that is what ultra-conservative don't want. They don't want us to feel normal. They don't want us to feel included. They want us to shut up, repress, or either meet their expectations and become like their sex object, their fetish. That is what they want. But like these are like the things that we have to deal with as a trans community, and that is always the same. It is so bad for your mental health. It is so dangerous. It is so traumatic. It's body horror to not only go through a puberty that doesn't align with your gender identity, but to also to be seen by your environment as the gender that you are not. And then you start repressing. Then you see like representation, like trans representation, like Jax from The Amazing Digital Circus, somebody who is scared to open up about being trans because a person they opened up with laughed at them. And then they start repressing and hiding who they are. And then hurt people, hurting other people, you know, getting angry, not wanting anybody to be close to them because it is so terrifying as a trans person to open up about being trans because you don't know how other people are going to react to you. This is what made me shut down for a really long time. I always thought that it's not going to be attainable for me to get gendered correctly in society, so why should I bother, right? I just look like a man, you know, people treat me like a man, they look at me and they see a cis straight man. And it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of years to get to the point where people are going to see me as, you know, a cis woman. Maybe that is not even going to be attainable because my shoulders are too broad and I'm too tall and, you know, my hairline and like all of like these things. So people are always going to see me as a trans woman or like somebody who is like a gay man or something, right? So it was difficult for me to like make this jump and actually go through the transitioning journey. And I'm still struggling with body dysmorphia. I'm still struggling with gender dysphoria. I'm still struggling with insecurities and so on when it comes to self-esteem, when it comes to me isolating myself, how I don't want to like go outside, how I feel insecure about like dressing up and so on. Like these are the things that many trans people are dealing with. And I feel like a lot of cis people refuse to just understand this because they don't know what it's like to go through life as a gender that you are not, and to have literally every person just treat you incorrectly. It's not that easy to like transition and get to a point where you get gendered correctly without HRT. And then it's like, okay, why do you even need to be forced through the wrong puberty when you already know that you're trans when you're, I don't know, 15, 16 or so on? Why do you need to be blocked from accessing this care? Why do you need to be tortured further and further just because some government, some conservative right-wing government pushes the idea that trans people don't actually exist and it's just gender ideology or whatnot? But yeah, so there are a lot of things that you have to deal with as a trans person, but all that we want literally always comes to like this point of like, I just want to be able to live my life as the gender that I am instead of like the gender that years ago people observed by looking at my genitalia. You know, every now and then, like it's getting exhausted when people call me a femboy, or when people like misgender me and so on based on my voice over and over again. But every now and then I have like a small interaction where somebody just views me like a woman and doesn't know that I'm trans. Every now and then that does happen, even on Valorant. And that just helps me keep going. It took a while, right? Like I went on HRT with like 25. I'm turning 30 next month. I didn't think that, like this month actually, I didn't think I would make it this long. And I didn't think I would get to a point where I can actually enjoy my life. No matter when you start, once you go on this journey, it's a tough one. It's a difficult one. But you're not going on it alone. And there are people who support you. And I didn't think that I'm going to like reach a point where all of the pain, all of the hardship is actually going to be worth it. And I'm glad that I endured all of it long enough to get to a point where I can actually start transitioning and living my life. Because like resolving this inner conflict is so much more powerful, and it helps you keep going and enduring all of like the horrible shit that is sadly tossed your way. And every small little, you know, joyful experience that I have helps me keep going.